Welcome back to our workshop. The project I've got in front of me today is restoring a vintage tea cart. This is something that's got a number of problems with it. The whole frame is loose. There's some damage to the finish on the top here, and on the wings there's an alligator type texture on the finish. There's more damage to the finish here on the shelves. The wheel's coming apart and the rubber is disintegrating on the tire. And the rubber on these small casters has just fallen off. There's a lot of restoration work to do on this tea cart, so stick with me, I'll show you how it's done.
As a furniture repair business, we're opening the doors to our workshop to show you the tools and techniques to repair furniture.
What I need to do is take that apart, repair it, and put it back together so I can get this chair in working order.
We give you tips to make your repair projects easier. Let's get into the workshop and start fixing furniture.
So where do you start a restoration project like this? The first thing I do is I label all the parts and take it apart. That way I can give special attention to all the different pieces that need restoration work. The inside of the drawer shows me that this is a Gibbard piece. The Gibbard Furniture Company is Canada's oldest furniture company. They were established in 1835. If you'd like to know more about the Gibbard Furniture Company and the founder, John Gibbard, check out the links in the video description. Now to orient the cart, I'm going to use this handle here as what I call the front. So I'll label all the parts here with tape, and that way when I go to put them back together again, I'm going to be able to assemble it easily and not have to second guess when I've got wet glue. A labeling system doesn't need to be complex. So this is my left back, this is my right back. On here what I do is I off-center the labels, so this becomes my left back here. And I'll put the same label here so I can match them up when I put this board back on. So over here, this is just the left wheel, this is the right wheel, and I'll continue labeling around all the tape. Now I can start taking this apart. Typically Robertson screws are really easy to take out because of the square drive, but there's some finish that's in these, so what I need to do is scrape out the finish to make room for that head to get in there, and then I can pull them out. On this side I've got a screw here that's just not coming out, so rather than try to pull it out and have to drill out that screw, I'm just going to clean out the ones on this side and hopefully they'll come out. It seems like there's a bit of finish on the hinges. There we go. So this is an interesting texture that's on this top. If I move it in the light here, you can see there's a little bit of texture to it. Let me give you a close-up. You can see there are some smooth sections here, but most of it has this alligator type of texture. So this is something I'm going to have to repair. I'll set this aside and then take the rest of the tea cart apart. Sometimes taking these pieces apart can be tricky because you end up with flaring the legs by putting a clamp on them like this. So what I often do is take a clamp and put it on the outside, and what that does is it keeps these legs parallel. So as I'm putting on pressure here, I'm keeping equal pressure on here, and that should release the parts. But not today. So white vinegar into the joint, let it sit, and it should come apart. The joints on this T-cart were really loose, so taking it all apart is really the only way to solve that. There was one joint here that's still rock solid, so I'm going to leave that intact. And there were a couple of dowels that broke when I took apart that middle shelf, so I'll have to deal with that later. What I'm going to do is take this stuff and set it aside, and we'll inspect the finish here to see what needs to be done. A T-cart typically has a tray on it, and because of that, the center of this has actually got a pretty good finish on it, but the edges have really been damaged. There was something that spilled down here that ended up going down on the two shelves, so the finish has deteriorated on these two corners. As I showed you, there's an alligator finish on these wings, so we've got a few things going on here that need to be addressed. This is a shellac finish, and it's susceptible to chemicals. So what I want to do is clean it off, and I'm using just some dish soap and some warm water, and that'll get rid of all the grime that might be on here, so I can figure out how I'm going to address the finish. You can see there's some dirt starting to come off here. Some of the marks along here are coming off just by cleaning them. So see how that cleans up? So this will just make sure I get any contaminants off the surface before repairing the finish. Here I've got some other white marks. Let me just see if they'll scrub out with a little bit of soap and water. Now they might come back a little bit once it dries, so time will tell. I'll also clean out some of these grooves because dust and dirt can get inside these carved parts as well. There's a fair bit of damage here, so I'm going to see what soap and water will do to clear some of this out. I'm not very hopeful that it's going to clean it off, but it might reduce it a bit. No, it doesn't seem to be doing much here. I'll try it on this side too and see what happens. Well, I took care of that part there, but for most of this, it's not having any impact. Now on the shelves, the damage is really on this one end, and it looks like the finish is taken right off. It looks like it's down to bare wood. Now it does look like it's got a stain on it, so that might help me in terms of finishing this, but I'll get these cleaned off, and then we'll start pulling out the finishes. These white marks here didn't come out with the cleaning, so what I'm going to do is use some superfine still wool, so this is 4/0, and I'm just going to take down a little bit of texture that's on here, remove some of that white mark, and then come back with some denatured alcohol and touch up this area. So you can see the difference here between this lighter area that's now had some sanding and how intense this white is here. So I'll go through this. Just bear with me for a minute. So I'm not sure what caused this. It might have been water standing. It could have been an alcoholic drink that spilt. I'm not quite sure what caused this particular issue, but we'll get it fixed up pretty quick.
The nice thing about working with shellac finishes is they are repairable. Unlike some other finishes where they can't be repaired, you have to strip and refinish. It's not the case with shellac. Okay, so now I need some denatured alcohol. What I'll do is just pour a little bit in a container here, and then I'll grab a rag. Now I just want a slight bit on just to dampen the rag, and we'll see what this will do to clean that up. Now when you're doing this work, you don't want to be going over it a second time, because what we're doing is actually dissolving some of that finish with the denatured alcohol. So you go over it once, let it dry, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like. You can see the area I touched up here has a bit more of a sheen to it, and in here I need to work a little bit in that. But this is a good first step to restore this finish. So you can see how well that worked on a shellac surface. The next step is to deal with the texture I've got on these wings. Now I noticed on the center here, it's nice and smooth right in the middle, but the closer I get to the edge, it starts to get that alligator texture. And here where I've done this repair work, I've got a little bit of a texture going on as well. So the next step I'm going to do is go through and use some denatured alcohol and gently go over these. And what that's going to do is soften the finish and get rid of the texture and let it reflood to something smooth. So I'll put some more denatured alcohol into my container here. And I need to be careful because as soon as this drips, it's going to cause an issue. So 100% pure bristle brush is what you need. Just soak it in there. I don't want a whole lot. And you need to move relatively quickly on this because it's going to get sticky very quickly. So just across. You can see how shiny the surface is with that alcohol on it, and that will evaporate, but the finish is already looking better. This is dried now for half an hour, and what I'll do is put this next to it, and you can see the difference before and after. So as I bring it closer, you see there's quite a shine here versus here. Now down here, I didn't quite get enough alcohol on it to dissolve it, but you can see here, it's really a nice finish. Over here, this is the texture. So I need to go over it one more time just on the edges where I didn't quite get enough alcohol on it, but you can see how that revives the finish. Now, amalgamating doesn't always work on surfaces. If you've got a finish that's really worn and it's flaking off with it, when you scrape it with your fingernail, it's really an aged finish that needs to come off. So you need to strip that and then apply a new finish. I've got a little bit of a damaged area here I'll deal with next, but I'm going to set these aside and let them cure, and then we can move on to these shelves. Both of these shelves have damage on one end of them. What I need to do is repair the finish and any color touch-ups. So this one here is more severe than this. This is the upper shelf. So whatever liquid came down here, likely an alcohol, took a long time to sit there and take the finish off. I'm concerned that the color might be taken off as well. So I'll get out my shellac and we'll just do a couple tests here to see if this does need any color correction. I'm using a Garnet Shellac, and this is the color that you see. This is about a 2-pound cut. When I mix it up, what I do is I take the shellac flakes, put them in a jar, and cover them with denatured alcohol. And that gives about an 8-pound cut, and it looks a little bit like maple syrup. It's pretty thick. So with this cut of shellac, I'm going to touch up the pieces and see what they look like. So I'm just putting some of the shellac on a rag, and we'll give this a light wipe and see what it looks like. Well, unfortunately this touch-up isn't going to work. I'll give you a close-up. You can see that there's a blotchy pattern here, and this is something that just a little bit of touch-up isn't going to cover up. What I need to do is strip off the finish and start over again. So I don't like to use chemical strippers in my workshop. It's chemicals I don't want to be exposed to, and what I use is a card scraper, and I'll show you how that's done. So my card scraper is basically just a piece of metal, and it's got hooks on the edges here that you use to peel the finish back with. This is also used to level out surfaces in wood. And I've got a backsplash on my workbench here, right here, and that allows me to do some pushing here while working on the piece. I don't need to clamp it down. So you can see what this does is it just scrapes off the surface, and you can run it this way, you can run it this way, whatever you're comfortable with. Just be careful that that edge that you're working does get a little bit warm. Once you find the angle in the card scraper, this really is quite an easy process. Now when I get to the edge like this, it's easier to actually pull it, so I'm just going to clean this off first and then I'll flip this around. So rather than try to scrape this way where I'm playing with the edge, if I go backwards, it just makes it easier to work to the edge and not damage the edge. I'll vacuum this off, move on to the other one, and then we'll get to sanding. So for the sanding, what I'm going to use is a 120 grit on here. And this is not veneer, this is solid wood, so I don't have to worry about going through it. But I don't want to get too carried away with it. Essentially what I want to do is just even out the color tone so it serves as a base for the stain. Now I use a vacuum on my sander here. That helps with dust collection, but also it's important to wear a respirator with a P100 filter on it to protect your lungs from the damage that sawdust can do to them. Here's a comparison after the sanding and before. This really only takes about 2 minutes. Now one mistake I see some people make when they refinish things is they look at the natural wood and they think, oh how beautiful, and they want to put a clear coat on. But you see the differences between this board and this board? And here I've got some wild grain versus some straight grain. There's a bit of sapwood here. This piece was never designed to be finished with a clear finish. There are different colors in wood here, and it was really intended to be stained something dark. So that's what I'm going to put back on here, get the existing color back onto it, something dark. I've got a number of different stains to choose from. I'll just find the darkest one that I've got here. Looks like a dark walnut, and the other option might be a gel stain. I've got a scrap piece of wood I'm going to test on. This is walnut, similar to that. I don't want to be testing on the actual piece. So this is the leg here. This is the finish color that I'm looking for. And it looks like it's got a little bit of a reddish tone in it, so I might want to use the chestnut gel stain. But first I'm going to test out just a regular dark walnut and see how this is going to work. Now, the thing about the finish that was on here, it was pretty opaque, meaning not transparent. And the thing with regular stains is they're meant to really just color the wood and preserve the visibility of the grain. A gel stain is something that's thicker and can help conceal some of those flaws and really gives you a rich color. So this being the darkest stain that I have in my cabinet, I'm not sure if this is going to give me the color that I need. So let me just get a glove on here. Take a small piece of paper towel and put it on the wood. That's actually not looking too bad. So I'll let that sit, soak in, and then wipe it off. In the meantime, what I'll do is pull out the chestnut, which has a little bit of a redder, orangey-ish tone to it. And I'll put that on and we can compare how the two look. So you can see this is like a jelly. And because it's so thick, it's got so much pigment in it, it does disguise the grain. So what I'll do is I'll put it on this other side here. I need to pick some of it up. You're actually supposed to stir this before you use it. And I'll put it on and we'll see what it looks like. It's been 3 minutes and I'm just wiping off the gel stain. With a traditional stain, you have to wait a little bit longer before wiping it off. So I'll wipe the stain off this now, and we can compare our stain samples. So here's the gel stain. That one's looking pretty good. This is the dark walnut. That's not the right tone. So we'll go with the gel stain. So I've stirred this up, all ready to go. By the time I get this finished off and get through this one, it'll be about 3 minutes on this one, so I can come back and start wiping it off. I've set the shelves aside and now I can focus my attention on the wheels. Now I've started working on the finishes on the top and the shelves because they take multiple steps and they need drying time in between. That allows me to do work like this in between the drying time, and we'll get back to those. So here we've got some rubber that's disintegrated on the wheel, and there's also at least one loose joint. So I'm going to take the old rubber off and see what type of repairs are needed to these wheels. I'm going to take this rubber off. There's a channel that runs through here, and there's a piece of metal that's holding the rubber on. So I just need to get access to that, and then I can clip it off. You can see how brittle this is. It's really just crumbling away. So just get a little bit of a channel in here. And then get my side cutters in there. Okay, so with the rubber off, we see what's going on with the wheel here. So this loose joint here, oh, it looks like there's a tenon here that's loose. So we'll see if I can pop this apart, and then we can glue it back together again. Like everything else, I'm just going to stick some labels on the inside, make sure I can label these parts. I'm not sure how much this is going to come apart, but better safe than sorry. It'll just take a minute to label everything. Okay, and then we'll get out a spreader clamp to to gently coax these parts apart from each other. So this is where I've got the loose joint. I know that that one's loose. So I'm going to see if either of these are loose. Oh, you can see here this one is as well. I'll grab another spreader clamp and put it the opposite direction and see if I can coax these pieces apart. Okay, so the two pieces over here are staying connected. This one's coming apart. So if I just continue to put pressure on them, I should be able to pull this out. There we go. Now that I have these apart, I can see that these are put together with a spline. What that is a slot cut in both pieces of wood and then a thin piece of wood added in between them, and it's a good way to reinforce a joint. It looks like the splines were put in first and then this groove was cut out afterwards to accept the rubber tire. There are some more loose pieces here, so I've got a little more to take apart. Down on this joint here, I see just a hairline of a crack. So what I'm going to do is use the spokes to give me a little bit of purchase to see if I can spread these apart. It is opening up. I just want to be careful. I'm not going to break it. You can see here at the inside of the wheel it's coming apart. At the outside it's not. So what I'm going to do is put wedges in here and I'll close up that joint and that should help pull it apart. So that's opened up at the bottom here. I just need to get a wider wedge here, insert it again, and it should pull it apart. Okay, so that piece is off, and let's see. It looks like some of these might be loose as well. So I'll go through the same process separating this joint, get all the pieces apart, and then I can glue them back together again. Well, not everything goes to plan. This part here is loose, and this part here is loose, but this is secure. So instead of trying to take this apart and potentially damage it, what I'm going to do is open up the joints as much as I can, insert glue, and then clamp them shut. Now, inserting glue in joints like this isn't ideal. It's not the best way to glue something up, but given that this is a wheel and that all these pieces are going to be held together and there's going to be rubber all around it, I'm not concerned about the structure of these. So injecting glue here I think is a good compromise compared to spending the effort and time to pull this apart and potentially break something and then put it back together again. These tenons don't have any glue residue on them, and there's just a little bit on the end, so they weren't glued well, and that's why they've come apart. So I'll put hide glue on both sides as I put everything back together again. Clamping a circle like this when gluing it up can be difficult, but I've got these rubber bands, and what I do is tie a couple of knots in them so that I can stretch them out properly. So this is my one end, it's just a loop. And then what I'll do is put that around the wheel. And then what I want to do is put another loop in it. So I'm going to put one back here. And this will make sense in a minute. Okay, so I now have two loops. And what I'll do is take the excess of this, run it through this loop here. And then what I'm going to do is pull it back on itself. And what this does is allows me to put tension on it. And then as I feed it back through this one, pull it back again, it allows for even more tension. So this rubber band doesn't slide very well. So what I need to do is just sort of coax it through each band and start providing tension on the wheel. So there's one. This is similar to using cotton rope to tie things down in a vehicle. If you put a couple of loops in it like this, you end up creating a lot more tension than you can just by pulling it yourself. So this gives me tension around the wheel, but I've got a spot here and here that are slightly open, so I need this to come together in these joints here and here. So I'll take a clamp and put it across this section and just pull those parts together. There, nice and tightened up. That's one repaired wheel. I've got one more to go. I'd like to ask you, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps other people find our videos. Now for this other wheel, the tire is really deteriorated. Let me give you a close-up. You can see this rubber is so bad, there's actually pieces missing from it. We'll get this fixed up, looking as good as new.
Be sure to go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter for links to new videos, workshop tips, and more. Now back to fixing furniture.
I'm now ready to put a coat of shellac on the shelves, and because they've had a gel stain on them, they're a little bit shiny, I'm going to take them down just a little bit with some steel wool and get them prepped for the shellac. I'm using 4/0 steel wool, and what this does is just smooths out the finish and gets it ready for that shellac. When prepping a surface before finish, always make sure you use a tack rag to go through and take off all the debris. Even though I've used a shop vac here, I should still be able to get some dust off here. A tack rag is just a really sticky cloth that allows you to pick up any dust and debris and will help you get a nice smooth finish. So it's an important step. It only takes a minute, but you can see here I'm picking up dirt and debris that the vacuum didn't. I'm using the Garnet Shellac with 8-pound cut, and what I'm going to do is just measure something out in a cup here. So I want it down to a 2-pound cut. So that means one portion of the shellac you see how thick that is, and then 3 portions of denatured alcohol to get the right cut. You can see here it's a much thinner consistency. That's perfect for this type of finish. It's an evaporative finish, which means the finish hardens by the alcohol evaporating on the piece. And that rich color will help make this a little bit darker as well. I'm using a natural bristle brush, and I'm just going to brush this on. Now, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to be working from left to right. That means I'll be going this way, and I won't be reaching over the finish I've already been working on. I start 3/4 of the way in, go right to the end, and then work my way back. 3/4 of the way in, and all the way back. This gets sticky very quickly, so you need to make sure that as you're applying the finish, you're not going over the old finish. And I'm overlapping my strokes by about 50%, just to make sure I've got good coverage. You can see this doesn't take very long. Just need to use the right technique and let the finish do its thing. While I have my brush wet, what I'm going to do is just touch up a portion of the top that had some damage to the finish. So essentially what I'm doing is filling in the finish where some is missing before I apply a final coat. This area right in here is missing most of the finish. I want to be able to sand this down and get it smooth to fill in that void. On this wing there's a small area where the shellac has been damaged, so I'm going to fill that in as well. This coat of shellac is now dried, so I can move on to the next. Now I'm seeing a little bit of grain still through it, so I know that I don't have enough thickness. So I need to put a couple more coats on, and also because I'm using garnet shellac, the more I put on here, the richer the finish is going to get. Shellac can also be wiped on, that's what I'm doing here. And it provides a thinner coat, but I find it's better to control the drips at the ends of the board. So by just putting on a few light coats, they dry pretty quickly, I can get a few more coats put on here and get the richness that I'm looking for. With the shelves set aside and drying, I can now turn my attention to these broken dowels. So there were 2 dowels that broke when I took this apart. What I'm going to do is drill those out or pull them out. We'll see what happens. I like to use fencing pliers when working on dowels because there's a natural opening here to be able to grip the dowels really effectively. You can see here as I put the pliers around it, it just really grabs the whole outside of the edge, so I can tell if a dowel is loose and I can pull it out if it is. And there's a larger one here for larger dowels. So it's a great tool for doing this type of work. This dowel is broken off too much to grab it, but this one here, I might be able to grip with the pliers. Let's see. Yeah, I can grab it and see if I can pull it out. No, it broke off. So that happens sometimes as you're working on these. So what I'm going to do is flush cut these and then drill them out. The reason I'm going to flush cut these is because it's going to be much easier to drill them out if I've got a flat surface. Now if I take an awl and punch a hole in the center, that's not quite center, I'll move it over. Then what I can do is use a brad point bit, which has a point on it, will keep me in the center, and I can drill a true hole. The advantage of using a brad point bit like this is because you're drilling into end grain, and sometimes a regular drill bit can wander. This way the brad keeps it centered and you'll get a straight hole exactly where you want it. Now this was more challenging because half of the dowel was missing. So the technique I'm going to use is start the brad point bit on an angle, and once I get it closer to where I want it, then slowly bring it upright to get it in the exact spot I want. Now I need to find some replacement dowels. These are pretty small dowels, so I hope I have some that will work. No, that's too large. Oh, that fits. Next I'm going to work on the small tires. So these caster wheels here are just two pieces of metal together, and this is an old piece of the rubber. Yeah, it's rock hard. So what I'm going to do is put new rubber on these, and they're a little challenging to work on unless I put them in the vise. The replacement rubber is 3/8 the same diameter as this, and what I need to do is cut it and glue it with CA glue. Now there are different viscosities. What you're looking for is the thin or what is normal for CA glue. The process for putting rubber on the caster wheels is different than the large wheels. I'll show you that process after. But essentially what I'm looking to do here is make sure I've got a nice seating in the wheel, and then what I'm doing is measuring the length of where I want to cut this off. So I'm going to cut it a little bit long to begin with, and then I'll trim it shorter. So here's my mark right here, and I'm just going to saw through this with a knife. So that gives me a nice straight edge, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for on this wheel. Now when I take the rubber and wrap it around the wheel, you'll see here that when I try to put the two pieces together, I end up with a bit of a gap. So what I like to do is trim it at just a slight angle so that I can get those pieces meeting up nice and I can get a nice tight fit. I can actually jam these together if I really push it, but that's putting a lot of strain on the parts. So my preference is to trim it just on a slight angle. So I need to take a little bit of length off as well. So a little bit of an angle, a little bit of a trim. Give it a try. So let's see what the fit's like. So I want to stretch it in there, make sure it's well seated, and then bring those two parts together. So it's taking a bit of pressure to do it. Let me just try and stretch that a little bit more. So it's a bit of a balancing act. If I make it too pointed, when this wheel rotates, there's going to be a bit of a bump there. So if you can see there, if I squeeze it in there, I've got a nice tight fit. I'm now ready to glue this together, but you need to make sure you're wearing gloves when you do this. When using CA glue, it's too high of a risk to actually stick your skin together, and no matter how careful I am, I've actually done it once. It's not fun. If you do, nail polish remover will take your skin apart. So the process here is pretty straightforward. You're just putting CA glue on the end, and you want to create a little bit of a puddle, but if you get too much, it's going to be messy. So I've actually got a little bit too much there. I'm just going to take an extra glove I've got to take that off, and then quickly wrap this around here and get it in place. And hold it. I hold it about 30 seconds, and then it's permanently bonded. There's a joint up close and a little bit of my glove. So we'll take off the excess glue with some steel wool. Well, I'm glad it was my glove stuck to this and not my finger. You've only got seconds to line this up, so it's really critical in terms of making sure that you've got that exactly where you want it, so that when it bonds, it's in the right spot. Otherwise, you're gonna have to cut it off and try it all over again. Let's get this cleaned up and we'll see what it looks like, and we'll move on to the next one. As I move the tire here in the light, you can see there's a bit of a gloss, and that's from the CA glue. So to clean that off, and my glove, use 4/0 steel wool. So this is super fine steel wool. And what that'll do is degloss that edge and get rid of my glove. There's just the slightest of a crown where I join that, so we'll take this off and see how it rolls. Yep, it's fine. So we're good to go there. That's one done. I'll do the other one. Now the process for doing the larger wheels is actually a little bit easier than this, and I'll show you that once I get this assembled. Before I assemble this, what I want to do is just rub down the shelves. So I'm going to put a coat of wax on, and what I want to do is just take any dust nibs off of here. And the best way to do that is with paper bag. So a paper bag is just slightly abrasive, and what it does is knocks off any of those little nibs of dust that might have settled onto the finish as it was drying. So if you try this on your next finish, you can actually feel a difference on one side versus the other. And it doesn't take a lot of pressure, but really you're just burnishing that surface. And then what I'm going to do is put a coat of wax on, and put that on with an ultra-fine Scotch-Brite pad. So this is synthetic steel wool, not actually metal. And I'm using a dark wax because I've got a dark finish. So I'll just pop this open. Grab some wax here and put it on. And then this just helps buff out that finish as I put the wax on. So the last step now is just making sure I've got all the mortises cleaned out and the dowels cleaned off. So I'll use the right size drill for the mortises, and I'll use a file to make sure all the glue is off of here and it's ready for the glue up. Now I can bring back the shelves, just buff up the wax, and then we're all ready for assembly. I'm not going to film the whole assembly process of gluing this up. If you want to learn how to glue up furniture, there's certainly lots of other videos I have that show you how to do that. So I'm going to skip ahead and get this assembled, and then we can look at how to deal with those big tires. These labels on these parts certainly make putting this together much, much easier. I'm not going to screw this on yet because the clamps are in the way here. It has to get set back, but this just gives me somewhere to work on the wheels. So it's the same 3/8 inch rubber that we used here. And all I need to do is run that around the wheel, make sure it's seated, so that I'm getting an accurate measurement. So now I can figure out the length right about here, and we're good to go. So I'll just get my knife lined up in that mark, and then cut it square. So now I can lay this on the wheel and double check the measurement. You can see there's a slight gap. I cut it too short, but there's enough give here that I can actually push that together and still have some space. Now what I can do is take this off and glue it together. Because there's enough stretch in here, I can actually stretch this on afterwards. That's why it's so much easier than working on these casters. I do have a few touch-ups on the wood here I'm going to do before I put that on there. And furniture repairs can be confusing. I produce these videos to help you understand furniture repairs. But if you're interested in some one-on-one coaching, I do that via Zoom. You can follow the link in the video description, and I'll put a link up here as well. So that's certainly bonded, but I would leave it for a little while before actually trying to stretch it. So I'm going to work here on the touch-ups I need to do on the wood. It's going to be easier to do before I put the rubber on, and then we can layer on the rubber, and we're good with the wheels. You can see a test I've done with stain markers on a video. I'll put a link in the video description. The rubber tire is ready to go on, so now I just set it inside the depression in the wheel and work it around to stretch it in place. This has been clamped up long enough for the glue, so I can take this off and install the axle. I'll put the screws in here, and then we'll check out the wheels. I only use a screwdriver in a situation like this to make sure I don't drive the screw too deep and go through the wood below. You can see there's a lot of wobble here in this wheel, and when I spin it, it sort of rattles. So I'll need to pop off the hubcap here. Oh, it's actually quite loose. It looks like one nail isn't holding. Someone might have already taken this off. Inside here, it's a large screw. This is a Robertson square head. Now in Canada, we're used to these. This is a standard screw for us. But that screw head looks really large. These are my Robertson screwdrivers, and these are also known as square drives. The red is the most common. It's used for a number 8 or a 10 screw. A number 8 is a normal woodworking screw. The green is for number 6, so more cabinet hardware. And the black I rarely ever use. So I'm going to see if I can use my slotted screwdriver to go across the angle of the corner and tighten that screw. Now this isn't an ideal solution. I've just looked it up because this puzzles me. There's actually a brown Robertson. I've never heard of it before, but obviously I need to buy one.
Now that I turn it, it's not too bad, just one spot. Maybe what I should do is take this off and wax it.
That's one large screw. And it's interesting, look at the tip here. This screw doesn't actually have a pointed tip on it. If I turn this around, look at that. I have never seen something like this before. I wonder if this might be a handmade screw. If you know something about this style of screw, I'd love to hear about it. That's an impressive piece of hardware. So I'll get this waxed up, and that should solve the problem of getting this wheel operating really nice and smooth. I'll also put some wax on this portion here. The wax is dried, so I'm just buffing it up now. And you can see there's a bit of a shine if I put the cloth here. A bit of a shine on that surface. So that should be nice and smooth for that wheel to turn well. Let's give it a try. I'm not able to get it perfect, but it certainly got a lot less play than it did before. So with that, I'll put the hubcap back on. This hubcap goes on with just some nails, and you can see here a piece is splintered out before. So I'm just going to rotate this on this angle
to get the nails put in, or I'm going to have something to nail it to. Just make sure that's in the center, and then tap it in. I'm using a tack hammer and upholstery hammer, just because it's such a fine nail here. I use my nail set so infrequently I misplaced it, so I'm just going to use a square cut nail. It's got a good end to it to tap these home. I'll now do the same thing on this side, get rid of that wobble. Once I do that, I'll take this off of the workbench and bring in the top, where I'm going to sand it down, flatten it out, put a new coat of finish on, and then rub it out nice and smooth. So I just need to build up a little more finish here. I'll take the shellac and just fill in the areas where I want it to build up, because I'm going to knock it back with sandpaper. So really I'm just looking to get a thicker layer here so the sandpaper can touch everything at the same level. So here's an extreme close-up. You can see I'm just adding in finish here on those worn edges. And here's that valley I'm just filling in with a little bit more finish. While the shellac is drying, I'll just show you a neat trick. Right here I've got a little dust nib, and if you're in between sanding coats, what you can do is just take a knife and lay it down on the bevel. So I'll turn it this way, you can see it's at a very steep angle, and if you just run it this way, you can take those nibs off. It works well in an area like this where I filled in some finish. I've done it here already. Again, just get it at the right angle and then give it a scrape. Now when sanding a finish, sandpaper clogs really fast, so it's best to use sandpaper that you can get wet. So what I'll do is just cut this into 4 pieces. And then what I can do is wrap that around a sanding block. I use mineral oil as the lubricant. And what that does is it creates a slurry and prevents the clogging from happening in the paper. So what I'm doing here is I'm smoothing out all the bumps and humps from the repairs that I was doing, and just get it ready for that final coat of finish. With the sanding all done, I'll wipe down the mineral oil and get as much of it off as I can, especially in these little crevices here. And then what I'll have to do is wipe it down with mineral spirits to get it prepped for the final coat of finish. With the surface all prepped, I'm going to put the final coat on, and I'm just going to pad this on. So it's a matter of using a soft cotton cloth, loading up the finish, and then wiping it across the surface. You have to move quickly with it because it does harden and get sticky quickly. So I'll just go across the whole piece, one coat, and we'll see how the finish looks. This shellac's now dried, and you can see it's still not a consistent shine, so I don't have enough on top of that. So I'm going to turn these boards around and work from the other end.
So here you can see there's a lack of a shine, and this has got 2 coats on it, so it's much shinier. Now the reason that I flipped these around is I was pulling from here this way, so there's more finish at one end than the other. So by flipping it around, I'm going to even that out this time.
These have been sitting for a little while. My shops have been closed because I caught COVID 14 days ago. You can hear it in my voice. My chest is really congested and it's progressively getting better, but it just made me realize the importance of protecting your lungs when working in the workshop and protecting it from wood dust, because it can permanently reduce your breathing capacity. COVID has temporarily reduced my breathing capacity. In fact, I go for a short walk in the neighborhood and a light stroll and my breathing gets labored. So it's just reinforced to me the importance of protecting my lungs so that wood dust isn't doing that damage. If you're interested in learning more about how to protect yourself in your workshop from wood dust, let me know. I'll make a video about that. One thing I did was I did some shopping while I was online, and I was able to find the screwdriver I was looking for. This is considered the Brown Robertson, and you can see here, this is the red, this is the normal size for a screw. You can see just how large the tip of that screwdriver is. So I now have the right Robertson to be able to tackle another axle like I did here. I'm going to give the surfaces one more wet sand. I'm using a 400 grit paper. So I'll just lube it up with some mineral oil and make sure we can level it out and get a nice finish.
This is one of the best ways to smooth out a finish. I'm going to apply a coat of wax after this, and it'll be nice and soft. Once I think I've sanded enough, what I'll do is wipe off the oil, and what I'm looking for are shiny spots. Spots that haven't been leveled out by the sandpaper, and you can see the dust that has come off here through the slurry of the oil. So you can see here there's a little bit of a shine. It's not quite flat yet. So as I wipe this down, you can see there's a nice, even, soft sheen across the piece here. That's perfect. It's ready for cleanup and then wax. Okay, with everything cleaned off here, I'm going to turn this upside down and I'll set the T-cart on and get that assembled. Okay, we'll get the holes lined up for the screws. I can now line up the wing here, get the hinges in place, and attach it with the screws. Now I have some longer screws, and these go on the braces here. And then what I'll do is turn this around, work on the other side, and then it's time for some wax. Now we can turn it right side up and put a coat of wax on it. The last step is to buff up the wax, and we're good to go. This is buffed up really well, so I'll take it into some natural light and show you the details of this restoration. I produce these videos to help you understand how to do furniture repairs. I believe this is a disappearing craft, so I'm passing on the knowledge to you to hopefully make sure more people can do furniture restoration. If you'd like to understand how to test the finish that you're working on, in this case I was working on shellac, you can check out a video here. I'll also leave another video to one of our more popular furniture restoration videos. Thanks for watching Fixing Furniture.